We are live.
We are back.
How you doing?
Great. How about you?
It's good. It's good. Today we're going to talk about tenant protections from our perspective.
Correct.
Is not advice or anything, but from our perspective, Southern California, um, LA County, San Bernardino County, somewhat, um, and it's been interesting, right?
Oh,
Because a lot of things changed after the pandemic or during the pandemic.
correct. There's a
And
lot of things that have been instituted to quote unquote protect the tenants.
right. And we want to be clear that, you got to do your research. We're just going to share our experience on it
Right.
because everybody's got a different experience, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it.
But you can't deny some of the things that have occurred and that we've gone through with tenants. And um, the idea of the tenant protections, the way I understand it, is that everyone was going through an extremely difficult time during the pandemic. And we want to give some sort of protection to the tenant from them getting evicted if they can't pay.
Right.
That's the idea.
Right.
But you and I were having a real interesting conversation because sometimes the protections towards the tenants end up doing more harm to the tenants than help. Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Or sometimes there are unintended consequences.
That's it.
See, I was talking with my good friend Andrew yesterday, and we were talking about unintended consequences and the story of the king, that one king that had a snake infestation, and he tells the villagers, "Hey, I will." He came up with the idea, or someone brought him the idea. If you begin to give compensation for the heads of snakes, you'll get rid of all the snakes. And you already know where this is going. All of a sudden, people start breeding snakes.
Dead snakes.
No, people start breeding snakes
Oh, yeah.
because now they can kill them and get and exchange it for money. So those are called unintended consequences, right?
And if you get rid of the snakes, guess what happens? The rat population goes up.
That's another unintended consequence.
So you have to be careful, man, whatever you do. It's just ramifications of things that...
But let's get into our perspective. What situations have you come across, if you can share? I know there's some in particular where tenants begin to maybe even take advantage.
Right. Well, because of the pandemic, a lot of things changed. And of course, we don't want to abuse situations against tenants. And I guess, over the years, that's been a problem.
Yeah.
And I can see how it has been. But what's happened now is, landlords are in trouble too. The pandemic didn't just hit the tenants. And I see protection for the tenants, but the landlords get pushed to the extreme, to the point that potentially they can lose properties because we have tenants that haven't paid. And there are what's called eviction moratoriums that have been placed. So if there's a tenant that's taking advantage of the situation, okay, and with tenants as well as landlords take advantage of the situation, right?
Sure.
So
Actually, I think it's human nature
yeah,
to take advantage of a situation.
right,
I mean, if you look at a kid, if you leave a kid alone, or he's gonna try and take advantage, of whatever situation or manipulate to a certain degree.
correct,
It's just in our nature, I feel.
correct.
Maybe that's just my perspective.
And then the one thing that's very important is everybody check your own regulations, guidelines, laws for
Sure.
whatever city, whether you're in the city of LA or outside just those suburbs. Everything changes potentially with the cities that you go. But in my particular case and in my particular area, there's been a couple of tenants that haven't paid rent for a very long time.
And we're talking Los Angeles County.
Yes, they haven't paid rent to me for, one of them in particularly over 2 years.
It's been
a little drip here and a little drip there, and things like that. And you can't, um, you can't give him a notice to cease and desist because the moratorium is in place.
Yeah.
And then you see how they have taken advantage of the situation in my particular
Right.
case. Okay.
And it's probably the minority, or it's a not everybody,
No.
but some people have.
Right.
Some people have, and they know how to work the system. And that's the thing, like I'm in a situation where I've seen how there's a property that has tenants and that are paying very low rent,
Uh-huh.
and there's no way to, well, there are ways, right? But um, doing everything legally, it's very challenging, difficult, and sometimes impossible to actually ask the tenant to vacate the property, even if their lease is up, even if the rents are way below market, because of the protections that are in place and have been extended for LA County, Los
Correct.
Angeles County. So, and it's interesting because I've been following it very closely since I've been involved in this. And I remember following it from last year, let's say, mid last year, what's going to happen. And it was supposed to end.
Right.
The eviction moratorium was supposed to. Now you can say, well, why are you evicting a tenant if they're paying and they've been there, let's say, a long time? Well, from the way I understand it, is if a tenant is on month to month, they're not on like a year lease or a 2-year, 5-year lease. The owner of the property, the landlord, the lord of the land, has the ability to ask the tenant to leave. And because they own the land, the landlord, as long as they give the notice, can request their property to be vacant. And then they can fix it up, do whatever they need to do, move into it, move a family member into it, rent it out at a higher rent. But the moratorium has put a pause on that.
Right. See, that's the way the game used to be played prior to the pandemic.
Right.
Now, you can say that it's somewhat maybe akin to, the rules of the game have been changed in the middle of the game. And I mean that because people have gotten loans, okay, have gotten themselves into debt. These are the landlords. Because, when people think of a landlord, they're thinking of someone like what is that? Blackstone and
investor groups,
investor groups and stuff like that. The reality is that there's a lot of mom and pop landlords that have worked very, very hard to buy 1 or 2 or 3 little houses, and they rent them out, or buy, a duplex here, a duplex here. And so they work very, very hard. So if they don't get the rents for those duplexes, potentially they go under. This is
They
your
can
mom
lose
and
it.
pop. Yeah,
They
they'll
can
lose.
lose it because they still have a loan on it, and if the
Yes.
rent's not coming in, they're gonna have to use fork money out of their pocket. But if they don't have the ability to, then the bank will take the property back.
Yeah, they'll
They'll
foreclose.
foreclose on it.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, one blanket sweep of the brush just to protect tenants, but there's nothing done on the other side for the landlords. And I've heard, I haven't gotten into this, so I really shouldn't talk about this, but I've heard that to get any kind of relief for landlords is almost practically impossible. Now,
We don't know on that because we haven't experienced that part.
we haven't experienced that.
Yeah.
But the unexpected consequences,
Yeah, unintended.
unintended consequences, even tenants that are paying very low rent, okay,
Hmm.
that would like to stay in the property,
Right.
okay, you're familiar with that. You're not able as a landlord to raise it because potentially what? They could come after the landlord if it goes over the estimated 4 to 5% rent increase plus CPI.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a situation where one of the tenants that we were talking with wanted to stay at the property,
Right.
understood that they were paying an extremely low rent for the area, less than half of what the rents would be at market rate or
Okay.
at the current r- price of rents, right? And so they understood that. They knew that. Tenants understand.
Oh yeah.
Everybody. They're sharp. People are. So they do their research. They realize they have a good deal there. So they said, "Hey, I would like to stay, and I'll pay what the market rent is or close to it. I'll pay. You know, I'll come up right there because I want to stay." And so I looked into it, and we looked into it, and asked with different companies that are involved with paralegal attorneys and all these things to try and see, is that a possibility. And we were told in this situation, LA County, that it's not legal, even though they say they would and they want to, because you have California has a rent control, and then on top of California rent control,
Cities.
you have LA County rent control. But California, well, I'm not sure about the LA County, but you have the city rent controls. Some cities have rent controls, and then so the situation was, you can't do that, even though the tenant's saying, "I want to stay, and I'll pay you the market rent," which is almost double what they're paying, because they understand they were getting a super deal. And the situation there is that sometimes the tenants.
Well, you be breaking the law.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate because the tenants' children go to local schools, they work locally, this and that, right? But the
Yes.
only option the landlord would have in this situation is to raise it just the 5% plus the CPI inflation, so you're somewhere close to 8 to 10%. But when the rents are so low, that wouldn't make sense. The numbers don't make sense because you can't pay a mortgage that way. So then at that point, you are forced. Your hand is forced to evict the tenant, or it's not an eviction actually, because eviction, the way I understand that, is the legal process of um, kicking them out. You give them a 60-day notice, or you do some sort of cash for keys arrangement where it's a mutual agreement that by a said date, the tenant would vacate, and upon that, a check would be
Issue.
issued to their, once the property is vacant, it will be made out to them. So it's an exchange. Hey, I'm giving the unit up um, for this money. But it's unfortunate because even though, let's say, they go that route of the cash for keys, and it's a good amount of money that, let's say, they'll receive on the cash for keys, they rather stay there. They rather continue to live there, especially for somebody who's lived there for more than 5 years, 10 years, and is established there. But the laws, the way I understand it, again, everybody does their research on
Right.
it. But I looked into it. We got help and paid for review. This to be reviewed by different companies, and that we were told there was no way to do that, to create an agreement legally. Now, we know that there are some people, and we've met some people that have found ways to say, hey, we'll do an agreement.
Mm-hmm.
They do an agreement with the tenant, and they raise the rents to a certain price uh, over what the rent control by the state allows. However, the way that I understand this is that they can get into trouble later on. It can cause an issue later on if um, someone goes back and says, "Hey, you did this. You shouldn't have done that."
Right.
Anyway, so those are some of the unfortunate things that come about with the tenant protections. But the other side of it, why were these even created? They were created the way I look at it is because maybe at one point landlords were maybe taking advantage, and so that's why were unions created?
Right.
Why was tenant protections created?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
To me, it was interesting because, you know, to be honest with you, I haven't come across someone that, was willing to pay the market rent and willing to sign any document or any waiver.
Yeah.
And also because, like you said, they were local to the area. Their kids go to the school. They work in the area, you know. So if I have to move, it's a big inconvenience.
Right.
But the current protection laws for the tenant do not allow the landlord to provide that kind of a benefit.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because I never would have thought, and that is a consequence that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't,
Unintended, because it ends
Yeah.
up in that particular situation
in that particular situation.
hurting that, I would say, that tenant.
Right. And I would think that, the ultimate outcome is that, unfortunately, those tenants are going to get somehow replaced. Okay? Somehow, at some point in time.
The moratorium ends, or they accept the cash for keys, or they just decide to move out, whatever the case.
Whatever the case.
Yeah.
And then at that point in time, they're going to have to pay market rent wherever,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Or.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I also thought was very interesting, because let's say a landlord wants to help the tenant by keeping the rents low. But in the long run, the landlord ends up, from my perspective, they end up hurting themselves if they ever resell it. Or they end up hurting the tenant at the time of a resale.
At the time of resale.
Yeah. And
Sure.
it's mutually hurts both of them.
Right.
Now, if the landlord says it's okay if I lose money as long as my tenant is happy, a good tenant, I'll accept less rent because I have a good tenant, and that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take care of the tenant too.
Sure.
The problem is that when the new owner comes, they're gonna say, okay, this, I'm getting, let's say, $2,000 a month, but I could be getting $3,500 a month.
Right.
And they have to substantiate their mortgage payment at their interest rate. It's not a paid off property like maybe it was with the previous owner, or a low interest rate with the previous owner. So that new owner is forced in a way,
Right.
to ask them to vacate and fix that up and get the $3,500 a month.
Right.
That's the way I see it. So it ends up hurting the tenant at the time of sale.
Potentially, yeah. That's
Potentially.
Yeah. Well, all these, I'm sure all these moratoriums and all these tenant protection laws, they mean well, but we should be aware that there are certain consequences that come with it that, end up sometimes hurting
Yeah.
the tenants. Because
Yeah.
I never would have thought about it.
Yeah.
Never. Unless we come across it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that this is not the only case. Okay? So,
But
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, with the onset of the moratorium,
Yeah.
um,
Which is still, we're filming this in February 21st. It's still going on.
It's still
February
going on.
21st, 2023. It's still continue to be extended for LA County.
right. And so, I've got a couple of people that have fully taken advantage of that situation.
Yeah.
So, it goes both ways, actually.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now, there are some tenants that need that protection.
right.
But what about also the tenants that have still jobs, are working, don't necessarily need like the protection from eviction? Now I'm talking about tenants that are paying rent, because there are other ways. If a tenant is not paying rent, they may be able to ask them to leave or evict or whatever the case. But we're talking about tenants that are paying rent. It's just a low rent. So every case is
different.
Every case is different. But from an investor point of view, we know some investors that will say, I'm just going to buy in areas or counties that allow me to, that don't have these kinds of protections, so I don't have to go through all this, challenges.
Right.
I'll just buy in a county or in a state that is a little bit more friendly to the investor. And we're talking again, a mom and pop investor, first time investor, maybe you own a few units, but not a Blackstone or something like that. What do you say to those people, that investors that say, I'm just going to put my money in a different state, right, outside of California? What do you think about that approach?
You can't blame them.
Yeah.
You can't blame them because the regulatory situation in California, as far as investors are concerned, has gotten pretty tight.
Yeah.
And, one extension on the eviction moratorium after another. One other extension. They say it was going to be taken off here, and then it gets extended, and then it gets extended again. And they're driving the investors to shrink the areas that they want to buy in, less regulatory. And, everything can be abused. And I'm sure that, there's been things done to tenants that are unjust, okay? So there should be some protection. But I think this has gone beyond the Call of Duty, so to speak, because it's genuinely putting investors and the mom and pop, these are the ones that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the big, huge ones that can take a hit and then write it off. We're talking about people that have been working all their lives to buy 2, 3, 4 properties and rent them out so that they could, as they get older, have a little bit of reprieve through passive income. And these are the people that are getting creamed because, they still paying mortgages on those properties, okay?
Right.
They don't get paid by themselves. And what they're doing is they're decimating their savings, okay? Their savings are dwindling down to nothing because they have to pull the money out in order to cover the mortgages that the tenants are not paying. So, everything, it needs to be looked at on an individual basis kind of thing,
Yeah.
but you can't. These rules are there, and you have to play by those rules.
They're
and
blanket.
It's a blanket cover.
Yeah.
So
You
can't blame them. You got, the ultimate goal for tenants and for landlords is to take care of their families and do the best they possibly can with their families.
Yeah.
When it gets abusive on either end,
Right.
that's what creates the problem.
Right.
And that's what brings about these kind of legislatures that sometimes, instead of helping, they end up making matters worse.
Yes, because I have seen situations where landlords do not take care of a property, and the conditions for the tenant are not good.
That's not
and
right.
That's not good either.
That's not right.
Yeah. I mean, how would you? And that's one thing in talking with tenants that I've learned in this process,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not an expert by any means, but I've learned to talk to people in business and in sales. You have to know to talk to people. One thing I've learned in talking with tenants has been approaching them as if I were speaking to my uncle or my aunt or my a cousin or something like that, or how would I want my father, mother to be talked to if they were in this situation? Number one, just respect. They're human. Respect. Treat everybody right. And then and that's why I think it's worked out with the tenants, is because they see that I'm coming from a good place,
Right.
and I actually care about the situation. And again, I think tenants understand that it's business and property. Why do people buy investment property? Well, one of the reasons is it's a business. It's a way of generating income.
Right.
It's not a free housing. Now, some people do buy property or build projects for people that are lower income or specific housing and things like that. Those
Mhm.
projects exist, but why does a mom and pop, your typical mom and pop investor that just wants to get started in owning duplex or a couple units, they buy it for income?
Of course.
And these moratoriums are making it difficult for them to make an income or uh, make it make sense, because um, a tenant can stop paying and they can't do anything about it,
Nothing.
or yeah, or if they're just paying but they're low rents. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I thought we'd touch on it because, again, these are just our experiences.
Right, right.
It's
right.
what we've gone through personally. We're not talking in a general thing. Every situation is different, but you have some tenants that have just been able to get by with paying you here and there,
Silch.
here and there,
Yeah.
and then and you can't do anything about it.
Not a thing.
Yeah.
Not a thing. So,
At the end of the day, we're people that are always looking at things from an optimistic point of view, and I see, from my perspective, the fact that a lot of people are saying I'll invest out of state, or I'll move out of state, or sell my properties here. I look at that as like, okay, there's opportunity for, let's say, my generation to now buy property here and just learn to handle the challenges.
right.
Because,
That's the key.
Because the older guy's not willing to put up with it anymore.
And
that's
why
the way I look at it.
Yeah, you have a lot of people that are selling because they're not willing to put up with all this stuff that we have to put up with when we're dealing with tenants,
Yeah.
and the regulations and the guidelines that get set forth by the, not even state and local authorities, municipalities. You have some cities that now require property inspections.
Upon sale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was never the case a few years back. Now you need to have, and I think these property inspections, I'm not sure if they have a city employee to go out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I know
So
that it depends on how many, if it's a single family or how many units and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some cities require it.
Yeah, and they have to. You need to sign off on that and pay a fee. So now there's another fee for that. That's an additional cost of
Yeah.
doing business. So tack it on, and then who ends up paying for all these things? The tenants. Okay, and if the tenants can't do it, then they decimate the savings of
Yeah.
the mom and pop business owners. So
Yeah. The cost.
I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you. I think the problem is so complex.
Yeah.
Really, honestly.
It's definitely complicated, but you just gotta find a way,
Yeah.
right? And again, that's where opportunities come and maybe deals happen, because now you're talking to somebody who's owned property for 30, 40, 50 years, and they don't want to deal with these headaches anymore. They don't want to deal with, not headaches, I'm talking about like either issues with the property, or the city changes the zoning, or it's like, wait a second, what just happened? Now it's commercial zoning. I can only rebuild commercial, things like that, right?
Right, sure.
Or there's something like the non-conforming and all those things that,
Right. Legal not conforming.
yeah.
Yeah.
So some people just rather not deal with it, and then that leads for an opportunity for people like us or anyone watching that wants to get into investing and will say, hey, I'll just figure out a way to make it happen. And that's one thing that I thought was really cool about Jose, that he's an investor,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, I'll just figure out how to make it work.
Right.
If I like the area, I know that area really well, I'm okay overpaying, which is interesting, because he's like, if all you do is go based off of an algorithm or some sort
Numbers.
of formula
Yeah.
and spreadsheet, he's like, I would have never bought any of the properties that I've bought.
Correct.
And that was a cool perspective.
Very cool, because an investor gave him a worksheet and he says, I go by these numbers. Lo and behold, that investor hasn't bought anything in the last 12 years. The numbers don't make sense. So he's buying property and he's making it work.
Yeah, he's making it work.
And he's being, he's very fair with all his tenants. Very fair with all his tenants.
Yeah.
But, the price of everything keeps going up. And so, it's a very interesting situation. At the end of the day, we all need to survive with each other and get along. So, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, we're still in it, and we'll see how things come out
Oh yeah.
once. But LA County is still has eviction moratoriums,
Mm-hmm.
tenant protections, and let's see where it ends up. But thanks for sharing your
Oh no,
perspective.
thank you, thank you.
All right.
All right.